My name is Olivia Green, and I wish I had never laid eyes on that painting. It was our first home together, my husband, James, and me. We were both excited about moving in and starting our life in a quiet, charming town. The house was beautiful, old, and filled with character. But there was one room that had always intrigued me. The library. It wasn't large, but it had these dark wooden shelves filled with books I'd never seen before. Old leather-bound volumes, some even looked centuries old. It was a peaceful place, the perfect spot to read and unwind. And that's when I first noticed it. In the corner of the room, hidden behind a set of books, was a painting. It wasn't framed like the other paintings in the house. It was just hanging loosely on the wall, with no protective covering, like it had been forgotten for years. The painting itself was unsettling. It depicted a young woman, her face pale and lifeless, with eyes that seemed to follow you no matter where you stood in the room. The longer I looked at it, the more it felt like she was watching me, waiting. I told James about it, but he dismissed it as a mere oddity of the house. It's just an old painting, live, nothing to be scared of. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Over the following days, strange things began happening around the house. I would hear soft scratching noises late at night, but when I checked, there was nothing there. Sometimes, I'd find objects moved from one place to another, but James swore he hadn't touched anything. Then the dreams started. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. In these dreams, the woman in the painting would speak to me in whispers. "Help me," she would say, "take me with you." It was always the same. Every time I looked at the painting, it felt like the woman was begging for something. One night, I decided to confront it. I stood in front of the painting and stared at the woman's eyes, feeling the pressure build in my chest. I could feel her presence, cold and suffocating, like the room had grown darker, heavier. I reached out and touched the frame. As soon as my fingers brushed against it, the air shifted. The room grew colder, and the lights flickered. And then, I heard the woman's voice, but it wasn't a whisper anymore. "I'm trapped. Free me." I stumbled back, terrified. The room felt like it was closing in on me, and I could hear the painting's edges scraping against the wall, as if it were coming to life. I rushed out of the library, slamming the door behind me. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I could hear the voice in my head, louder this time, saying the same thing over and over again. "Free me." The next day I told James everything, but he still didn't believe me. He laughed it off, saying I was just imagining things. But when he went to work, I couldn't resist. I went back to the library. The painting was still there, staring at me with those lifeless eyes. This time, I was determined to end it. I reached up to grab the painting and take it down. But as soon as my fingers touched it, I felt a cold shock shoot through my body. I gasped, but I couldn't pull my hand away. The painting was pulling me in, dragging me closer to it. I couldn't move. I felt my feet leave the ground, and the world around me blurred. And then, I was in the painting. I was standing in a dark, desolate room, the same room from the painting. The woman was there, standing in front of me, but this time, her eyes were different. They were full of rage. "You shouldn't have come," she hissed. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The walls of the room were closing in, and the woman stepped closer, her cold fingers brushing against my skin. Suddenly, I was pulled back, and I found myself standing in the library again, gasping for air. The painting was now on the floor, shattered. I couldn't explain what happened, but when I looked at the shattered pieces, I noticed something terrifying. The woman's eyes were still moving, following me as I backed away from the wreckage. That was the last time I ever saw the painting. We moved out of the house soon after, but even now, I still feel that presence, her cold stare, her whispers. I've seen her in my dreams, and sometimes, in the corners of my vision, and I know, deep down, that she's still waiting. My name is Michael Harper, and I should have listened to the warning signs. When we moved into our new home, the first thing that stood out was the flickering light in the kitchen dot. It was an old house, sure, but there was something about that light that unsettled me. No matter what I did replacing bulbs, checking the wiring, the light would always flicker. It wasn't just an occasional flicker. It was a constant, intermittent pulse, like it was trying to communicate something. My wife, Emily, didn't seem to notice it at first. She thought it was just an inconvenience. "It's an old house, Mike. Probably just a loose wire," she'd say. But it didn't feel like a simple electrical issue. It felt deliberate. One night I stayed up late, working in the kitchen. Emily had gone to bed, and I thought I'd get a head start on some paperwork. The light flickered again, this time with more intensity, almost like it was trying to get my attention. I stared at it for a long while, then shook my head. "Just a light. Nothing more," I muttered to myself. But then, it happened. The light went out completely, and in the darkness, I heard it. A whisper. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there, coming from the corner of the kitchen. I froze, my heart pounding. "Mike." The whisper came again, only this time, it was louder, more urgent. "Mike, come closer." I grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight, and scanned the room, but there was nothing. The kitchen was empty. I moved toward the light switch, ready to turn it back on, but before I could reach it, I heard a soft clink, like something had dropped onto the floor. I turned quickly and shone the light toward the sound. There, on the floor, was a small piece of paper. I bent down to pick it up. The note was written in red, ink so fresh. It looked like it had been written minutes ago. The words were simple, yet chilling. "I'm always here, waiting for you." I dropped the note, my hands shaking. What the hell was going on? The light flickered back on, but when it did, the room was no longer the same. The walls seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, and in the reflection of the window, I saw someone standing behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. That night, I didn't sleep. The light flickered on and off all through the night, each time more erratic, more frantic. I could hear the whispers, too, coming from the shadows. The next morning, Emily asked me what was wrong. "You look terrible, Mike. Did you sleep at all?" I didn't tell her about the note, or the voice. I just said, "It's nothing." But the flickering didn't stop. It became a pattern. Every night, the light would flicker. Sometimes, it would go out completely, and the whispers would return. Other times, the light would stay on, but the shadows in the corners of the room would stretch unnaturally long. One evening, I decided to confront it. I waited until Emily went to bed and then stood in the kitchen, staring at the light. I dared whatever was haunting me to show itself. The light flickered once, then twice, and then, for a brief moment, it stayed still. The room grew colder. I could see my breath in the air, and then a figure appeared in the corner of the kitchen, just outside the reach of the light. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark shape, standing still. But then the whispers came again, only this time, they weren't whispers at all. "You shouldn't have waited." The figure stepped into the light. It was Emily, or at least, it looked like her, but her eyes were empty, black holes, and her face was twisted into an expression of pure terror. I screamed and ran out of the kitchen, locking myself in the bathroom. When I dared to look out, the kitchen was empty again, but the light still flickered. I've moved out since then, and I've never returned to that house. But every time I close my eyes, I can still hear the whispers, and I can still see the figure, standing in the kitchen, waiting for me to come back. I don't think the house is ever really empty. My name is Sarah Parker, and I used to think I was just imagining things. We'd been looking for a new house for months, and when we stumbled upon the one on Maple Street, it felt like we'd finally found our perfect place. The house was old, yes, but that was what made it special. The wooden beams, the creaking floor sit, was everything I had hoped for. The one thing that stuck out, though, was the portrait in the hallway. It was an oil painting, a woman dressed in a Victorian gown. She was beautiful, with pale skin and dark, almost black hair. But what struck me as odd wasn't just her appearance, it was her eyes. Her eyes seemed to follow you, no matter where you stood. At first, I thought it was just the angle of the painting, the way the light hit it, but the more I stared at it, the more unsettling it became. I could feel her eyes tracking me. "Do you ever feel like she's watching you?" I asked my husband Tom one evening. He laughed. "It's just a painting, Sarah. You're being paranoid." But the next morning, I woke up to find that the painting had moved. It had been facing forward the night before, but now it was tilted just slightly, as if it had turned to look at something behind me. I told myself I was just imagining it, but that night, when I went to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing in the hallway, watching me. I turned the corner and froze. The painting was tilted again this time, much farther than before. I stared at it for a long moment, then quickly moved to straighten it, and that's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. The woman's face in the painting had changed. The smile, which had been soft and serene, was now twisted, as though she were grinning menacingly. I took the painting down and set it in the basement, hoping that would end it. But that night, I heard footsteps in the halls, low, deliberate steps. I crept out of bed, heart pounding. The footsteps were coming closer. I reached the top of the stairs and stopped. There, at the foot of the stairs, was the portrait. It was back. I rushed downstairs to see if Tom had moved it. He was asleep, snoring softly. I turned to the painting, my body shaking. The woman's eyes were no longer following me, they were staring directly at me, like she was waiting for me to make a move. I couldn't take it anymore. I burned the painting. I watched as the flames consumed it, hoping that would be the end of it. But as the painting cracked and charred, I heard a low, cold laugh, one that echoed through the walls. The laugh faded, and silence fell. But even now, in our new home, I can still feel her eyes. Sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up to the sound of soft footsteps in the hall, and I'll hear her whisper, "You can't escape me." My name is Henry Matthews, and I think the house we moved into might be alive. When my wife, Rachel, and I decided to buy the old farmhouse, we were looking for something peaceful, somewhere we could escape the noise of the city. It seemed like the perfect retreat. The house was secluded, surrounded by fields, with just a few neighbors miles away. But there was something strange about it. From the moment we stepped inside, the house was dark and naturally dark. Even with the curtains open, the sunlight barely seemed to reach the rooms. We chalked it up to the old, thick walls and the dense trees surrounding the property. But there was something else. The sounds at night, when we thought we were alone, we could hear faint scratching noises. At first, I assumed it was just the house settling, but the sounds got worse. One night, I woke up to the unmistakable sound of whispering. I sat up in bed, trying to locate the source. "Rachel," I whispered. She didn't respond. I turned on the light, but there was no one in the room. The whispering was faint but persistent, as if it was coming from somewhere inside the walls. I stood and followed the noise down the hallway, tracing it to a small, narrow closet under the stairs. The whispers were louder now, almost urgent. I reached for the door handle, but as soon as I touched it, the noise stopped. I opened the door, expecting to find something, but it was just an empty space, except for the scratches. The walls inside the closet were covered in deep, fresh scratch marks, as though something had been trying to claw its way out. I shut the door quickly, my heart racing. The next day, Rachel and I decided to investigate the house further. we found something even more disturbing. In the basement, behind a false wall, we discovered a small room. Inside it was a journal, its pages yellowed with age. The entries were cryptic, describing strange occurrences, doors that locked by themselves, footsteps in empty rooms, and strange, shadowy figures that moved just out of sight. The most chilling entry, however, was the last one. They are in the walls now. They wait for us. I think they want to come out. I tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in the house. The noises grew worse, and sometimes, when I walked down the hall, I would catch glimpses of shadows out of the corner of my eye moving, shifting, always just beyond reach. Then, one night, it happened. Rachel and I were sitting in the living room when we heard a loud bang from upstairs. We rushed up, only to find the door to the attic wide open. We'd never opened it before, and there, in the attic, was a massive hole in the wall. The hole had been punched through from the inside. I don't know what we found there, but it was enough to make us leave. As we packed our things, we heard something inside the walls. It was a voice. "You can't leave us. We're coming." We never returned to that house. I still hear the whispers sometimes, but now they're closer. I think they followed us. My name is Ethan Wells, and I swear to you, the house changed when my wife, Claire, and I bought the place. It was everything we had dreamed of, an old Victorian-style home with just enough history to make it charming, but not enough to make it creepy. Or so we thought. We spent the first week unpacking, rearranging furniture, and making it ours. That's when we found the door. It was in the hallway, tucked between two closets. A small, unassuming wooden door. Claire frowned. Was this always here? I shook my head. No, no way. But there it was. I reached for the handle. It was ice cold. With a deep breath, I turned it and pushed the door open. Inside was a tiny, empty room, no bigger than a walk-in closet. The walls were bare, the floor covered in dust. The air inside smelled old, like something that had been sealed away for decades. "Guess we never noticed it before," Claire said. "Old houses are weird." That should have been the end of it. But the next morning, the door was gone. "Very funny," I muttered, assuming Claire had moved something in front of it. She just stared at me. "What are you talking about?" "The door," I said, pointing at the blank wall where it had been. Her face paled. "Ethan, there was never a door there." I ran my hands over the wall, knocking on the surface. It was solid, seamless, but I knew what I had seen. That night, I barely slept. I kept picturing that little room. I had stepped inside it, hadn't I? At 3:17 a.m., a loud thud woke me up. It came from the hallway. I grabbed my phone and crept out of bed. The hallway was dark, stretching into shadows, and then I saw it. The door was back, standing exactly where it had been before. This time, I didn't open it. I turned and ran back to bed, pulling the covers over my head like a child. The next morning, the door was gone again. I started obsessing over it. I measured the hallway, checked the blueprints. There was no record of any extra space there, and yet, some nights, I would wake up and it would be there again. Sometimes, it would be open. Claire begged me to stop thinking about it. "Maybe you're just dreaming it," she said. Then one night, I woke up and she was gone. The bed was empty. The house was silent and the door was open. A faint scratching sound came from inside. I stepped closer. "Claire," my voice cracked. The scratching stopped. A whisper drifted out. "Come in." I ran. I searched the house, my heart pounding. I finally found Claire outside, barefoot in the cold, staring up at the house. "I was sleepwalking," she murmured. Her eyes darted to the hallway window. "Ethan, what's that?" I turned. Upstairs, in the window by the hallway, was a face, staring down at us. The next day we moved. I don't know what was in that room. I don't know if it's still appearing for the new owners. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I can still hear scratching. My name is Michael Carter, and I don't know how to explain what happened to my family in that house. We moved in on a crisp autumn afternoon, our boxes stacked high, and our excitement even higher. My wife, Jessica, loved the spacious kitchen. Our daughter Lily picked the sunniest room upstairs. Everything felt perfect at first. Then we noticed the chair. It was an old wooden rocking chair sitting in the corner of the living room. It hadn't been there when we toured the house. Did the movers leave this? Jessica asked. I shook my head. Probably just something the previous owners forgot. We moved it to the garage. But the next morning, it was back. I was the first one downstairs. The second I stepped into the living room, my stomach dropped. The rocking chair was sitting exactly where it had been before. I checked the garage. It was empty. Jess, I called. Did you move this back? She came downstairs, rubbing her eyes. What are you talking about? I pointed at the chair. She frowned. Michael, I thought you put it outside. My blood went cold. That night, as we lay in bed, we heard it creak, the slow, rhythmic sound of wood shifting against wood. Jessica and I turned to each other. Did you hear that? She whispered. I grabbed the flashlight and tiptoed downstairs. The chair was rocking on its own. I stood frozen, watching it sway gently back and forth. The air around it felt thick, charged. Then, as if sensing me, it stopped. I grabbed the chair and threw it outside. This time, I took it all the way to the curb. But the next morning, it was back. Things got worse after that. Lily started talking to someone in her room. He's nice, she told us. He just doesn't like being alone. Who's he? I asked. She smiled. The man in the chair. We hadn't told her about it. That night, I locked the chair in the basement, chained it to a support beam. At 3:33 a.m., we woke up to a loud thump. I rushed downstairs. The basement door was wide open. The chain was on the floor, snapped in two, and the chair, back in its usual spot. I lost it. I grabbed an axe from the garage and smashed the damn thing into pieces. Jessica screamed. Michael, stop. The moment the final piece splintered, the whole house shook. The walls groaned, the lights flickered, and a deep, rattling breath filled the air. A single whisper followed. That was a mistake. We left that night. A few months later, I drove by the house. A new family had moved in, and on the porch, sitting in the same exact spot, was the chair. My name is Jonathan Miller, and I don't believe in coincidences anymore. When my wife, Alina, and I bought our new home, it felt like a dream come true. It was a charming, two-story house with a wraparound porch, nestled in a quiet neighborhood. Our 5-year-old son, Oliver, was especially excited. He ran through the halls, claiming one of the upstairs bedrooms as his own before we had even moved the boxes in. The only problem: the house had a strange smell. It wasn't mold, nor was it rotten wood. It was something, old. Something that smelled like time itself had seeped into the walls. We should have left the moment we noticed. The first night, I woke up at exactly 3 a.m. I don't know why. Didn't hear anything, but something felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. Then I heard Oliver giggling from his room. Alina, I whispered, shaking her. Did you hear that? She groaned, half asleep. He probably had a funny dream. Go check. I got up and padded down the hallway. Oliver's door was slightly open. I peeked inside. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the open closet. Ollie, I whispered. What are you doing up, buddy? He turned to me, his tiny face pale in the moonlight. She's funny, Daddy. My stomach twisted. Who's funny? Oliver pointed at the closet. I flicked on the light. The closet was empty. There's no one there, champ. He frowned. She was just here. My skin crawled. I tucked him in and left the door slightly open, but as I walked away, I felt something watching me from the dark. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, Alina and I found the drawings. Oliver had covered his bedroom walls with crayon sketches. They were simple, childlike, but one thing stood out. Every picture had a tall, black figure standing near our house. "Allie, what's this?" Alina asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "That's her," he said simply. "Who's her?" I pressed. Oliver's face darkened. "She doesn't like it when we talk about her." That night, the noises started. The sound of footsteps on the stairs. Even though we were all in bed, the sound of fingernails scratching the walls, just faint enough to wonder if we imagined it. The sound of a woman laughing from inside the walls. We tried to ignore it. We tried to rationalize it. Then, one night, Alina woke up screaming. I bolted upright and turned on the light. She was sitting up in bed, shaking, her hands clutched around her throat. As she was here, she gasped. She was on top of me. I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis, I wanted to say. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the room with us that morning. I made the decision. We're leaving. We packed everything within hours. As we drove away, Oliver looked out the window and waved. Alina and I exchanged a look. "Who are you waving at, sweetheart?" she asked. Oliver smiled. "She's coming with us." The house should have stayed behind. But the sounds, ... the scratching, the laughter, ... they followed us. And now, wherever we go, we wake up at 3 a.m. because she never left. My name is Daniel Reeves, and I wish we had never moved into that house. It was the last one on a dead-end street, surrounded by withered trees and an overgrown yard. My wife, Madeline, and our 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, thought it had character. I thought it felt wrong. From the moment we arrived, Sophie kept looking toward the attic window. "What are you staring at, sweetheart?" I asked. "The boy," she said matter-of-factly. "He's watching us." I forced a chuckle. "There's no one there, kiddo." But when I looked up, I swore I saw a shadow move behind the glass. That first night, I barely slept. The house creaked and groaned, as if shifting under its own weight. I heard whispers in the walls, dry, crackling voices, but when I pressed my ear against the surface, they stopped. At 3:12 a.m., Sophie's scream tore through the silence. I bolted out of bed and ran to her room. She was curled in the corner, trembling, her sheets twisted around her legs. "He came out of the wall," she sobbed. He had no eyes. "Daddy." I searched every inch of her room, but it was empty. Madeline tried to calm her down. "It was just a nightmare, honey." I wanted to believe that. I really did. The next morning I found something disturbing in the attic. Buried under old boxes was a child's bed, a tiny, rusted frame with torn sheets. Next to it, a single, cracked photograph. It showed a boy, maybe 7 years old. His face was scratched out. That's when I heard Sophie laughing downstairs. Relieved, I went down until I saw her standing at the bottom of the stairs, completely still, facing the wall. "Sophie," I called. She turned her head slightly. She whispered, "He doesn't like it when you talk too loud." The air went cold. I pulled Sophie away from the wall, and she screamed, "Don't, you'll make him angry." That was it. That night I packed our bags. But as we rushed out, the front door slammed shut on its own. Madeline yanked at the knob, but it wouldn't budge. The lights flickered, the house groaning like a wounded animal. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from upstairs. I turned, my breath caught in my throat. The attic door was open, and at the top of the stairs stood a small, shadowy figure. "Don't go," it whispered. We never looked back. The next day, I researched the house. A boy had lived there decades ago. His parents had locked him in the attic. He starved to death. We moved across the country after that, but at night, Sophie still talks to him, and sometimes I hear him talk back. My name is Benjamin Hayes, and moving into a new house was supposed to be a fresh start for my wife Claire, our son Noah, and me. We had spent years in a cramped apartment, saving up for a place of our own. When we found a beautiful, spacious house at an unbelievably low price, we jumped at the opportunity. I should have questioned it. The house had stood empty for years. The real estate agent told us the previous owners had moved suddenly, leaving most of their belongings behind. That should have been a red flag, but we were too excited to care. The first thing we noticed was the locked room upstairs. Every door in the house opened easily except that one. It had an old iron handle and no keyhole, just a heavy lock that wouldn't budge. The agent claimed it was just a storage room and that the previous owners had lost the key. I didn't like it. On our first night, I dreamed of that door. I saw it swinging open, revealing a darkness so deep it felt alive. A whispering voice called my name from within, stretching the syllables like someone trying to remember how to speak. I woke up covered in sweat. The next morning, Claire found Noah standing in front of the locked door, his small hands pressed against it. "What are you doing, buddy?" she asked gently. He didn't turn around. "The man inside says he used to live here." Claire shot me a worried look. "There's no man in there, Noah," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It's just a storage room." Noah finally turned to face us. His eyes looked distant, unfocused. "Then why is he knocking?" A loud thud came from the other side of the door. We jumped back. The noise was deep, hollow, like something heavy striking wood. My breath caught in my throat. Claire grabbed Noah and pulled him away. That night, the knocking continued. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic. I tried to ignore it. Claire buried her head under the covers. But Noah, he laughed. The next morning, the door was unlocked. I swear, I had not touched it. But there it was, slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of blackness inside. "Noah," I called out. He stood by the doorway, staring inside. His lips moved, but no sound came out. I grabbed him, pulled him back, and slammed the door shut. "Claire," called the locksmith immediately. He arrived within the hour, but the moment he touched the handle, his face paled. I can't touch this," he stammered, stepping back. "Something's wrong." That was enough for me. We packed our bags and left that night. We didn't try to sell the house, didn't go back for our things. We just left. Noah doesn't talk about the house anymore, but sometimes, when he's asleep, he whispers, and the worst part, he's speaking in a voice that isn't his own. My name is Ethan Carter, and I never believed in ghosts until we moved into that house. It was supposed to be a fresh start. My wife Lillian, our 6-year-old daughter Emily, and I had finally found a beautiful old Victorian home at a shockingly low price. Too good to be true, right? Well, it was. The first night, I woke up to a whisper. Soft, unintelligible, like someone speaking just beyond my range of hearing. I brushed it off as the wind, but the next night, it happened again closer. This time, by the third night, Emily was terrified. "Daddy, someone's in my room," she whimpered, clutching her stuffed rabbit. I rushed to her room, heart pounding. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, but the moment I switched on the light, there was nothing. No one. Lillian tried to reassure me. "It's just an old house, Ethan. Old houses make noises." I wanted to believe her. But then, things escalated. One night, I woke up gasping for breath. A crushing weight pinned me to the bed, an unseen force pressing against my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My vision blurred, and in the dim moonlight, I saw something, a figure standing in the corner of our bedroom. It was tall, almost inhuman, its body shifting like smoke. Its face was mine. When I finally broke free, I shot up gasping. Lillian was sound asleep. Had I imagined it? The next day I checked the house's history. Tragedy: a man had lived here alone for decades. He went mad, claiming his own reflection was trying to replace him. He slit his own throat in the master bedroom. I didn't tell Lillian. I just said, "We need to leave." That night, as I packed, I caught my reflection in the window, and it smiled at me. We left everything behind, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear the whispers.